So yeah, a little more into your product journey, where you started with Xbox Live, and then you
Yeah.
went on to Netflix. So the video streaming SDK. I still remember Marina. She once said, if you want to find the lady who put the button to your remote, the Netflix button to your remote, just find Aarthi. That really stuck to me. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna like ask Aarthi, that, are you the lady who put the button to the remote?
And she was
So
being super generous about it. But yeah, like the team that I worked on, I was a product manager on the Netflix SDK team, which means uh, my job was to, and this is like Netflix from a long time ago, right? Like
Mhm.
no original content, no The Crown or House of Cards or anything else. It was all like third party studio content and
Mhm.
no international. So Netflix was only US at that point. We tried to do a Latin America expansion when I was working there, but that was like
Mhm.
semi-successful, not like great. And so very, very small company as such. And kind of a new bet for me coming from Microsoft into like a much smaller Silicon Valley company. But
Yeah.
my job at that time was to build the Netflix SDK, which basically this is a software that goes into TVs and set-top boxes and Blu-ray players. So my job was to go work with Samsung or a Sony or a Panasonic and integrate Netflix into their devices so that
Mhm.
when customers who bought the TV would like press a button, they would see Netflix and they can like have it integrated. So they didn't have to go download the app and do things like that. So yes, like that was one of the things that my team did, is like put that red Netflix button on the remote control. But I don't think I can take like solo claim for that. She was just being really generous and nice about it.
Yeah, no, but absolutely, you definitely played a big part there. So it's good to know that something as simple as clicking a button actually, involved a lot of product work, and that's something that often people overlook because with products, the outcome that you get is more. Oh, it looks so easy, but behind scenes of what went in is something that involved like days and hours and like years of work. Yeah, one of my questions was around this, like how from being an operator working on a couple of these products to being a founder where you initially worked on True and Co and then you worked on Blue White, which actually became one of the top 25 startups in the valley, right? So how did you validate
Yeah.
what you wanted to work on, like whether it's products or whether it's
Yeah.
like a product that you're building?
I've always wanted to start a company, like do like a tech startup, and always had the itch for it. I think when I moved to Seattle, I'd never actually moved. Like I'd never traveled outside India, and so the
Mhm.
first time I traveled out, I basically packed my suitcase and moved to Seattle, which was like super daunting because I had no idea what it would look like. Like my vision of America was all from like watching shows like Friends,
Yeah.
and so for me, it was like very very different because I think I landed in Seattle last day of November or something, tomorrow to the day.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just really cold, snowy, um, felt like, and I had no kind of like winter wear because, you're in Chennai, like what are you using wool coats for? It was kind of a culture shock for me. But I remember like being there, working through Microsoft and being like, someday I want to go start a startup. And at that time, the conventional wisdom was to, if you want to start a company, you have to come to Silicon Valley. I don't think that's like necessarily true. It really depends on the kind
Mhm.
of company now. But at that time, that definitely was a sentiment. So when I ended up joining Netflix and moving to Silicon Valley, I was like, okay, I think, I can actually go do this kind of thing. So I'd spent like a little over a year at Netflix and I was like, yeah, I think I need to like figure it out. So that's kind of when, two companies basically back to back, I'd gotten started. And I think having worked at like a really big company as like Microsoft and then like a much smaller company like Netflix, when
Mhm.
I started my own company, I think it was really helpful to have a sense of structure on how to go
Mhm.
about building things, how to deal with ambiguity. Like I felt like I could do product. Like product was like well under control because I was experienced enough to go do that. Now I have to go learn everything else from like
Mhm.
fundraising, hiring people who are like not necessarily just technical because we had e-commerce companies, which means we had like fulfillment centers. We needed to hire people for packing and shipping things. Then I had to go figure out what does shipping logistics look like, and
Mhm.
had to deal with like this all other set of problems. But the thing that gave me a little bit of faith and confidence was that product was like under control. I could do that,
Right.
and so that was helpful. And I generally say this to founders too when you're starting something. It's like pick up the thing that you think your strength is and kind
Mm.
of set that aside. And at some point, you're going to have to like find somebody else to like replace you there, because you'll have other things to go work on and solve. But having something that you're really good at and you have confidence in gives you this like morale boost for yourself, because a startup is tough. I mean, there are days when you're just like thinking, are you crazy? Why did you do this? Like, why did I leave a really, really good job? And why did I start this
Yeah.
thing? What if it fails? What will my parents say? What will everybody else say? Oh my God, like what, I have this employee who's like working for me
Mm.
now. What would I tell them? And oh, my investors, I don't want to let them down. And there is a lot of like guilt and shame and just, confusion around like building a company. But at some point, you also have a sense of clarity. You've always wanted to go build this. You know that you're like kind of sort of doing this. You may not have all the right answers, but you're well on your path to go figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so I think um, picking up some sort of experience, either as like working at a different company or being an intern for a different startup founder or something of that sort, I think is like really helpful, because that way
Mm.
you don't have to, even with it, it's not even about the experience or anything. It's not even about the learning. It's about like your own confidence level
Yeah.
on what you think you can do versus not.
Mm.
Because at that point, early stage startups are entirely a confidence game, and your own psychology works against you, and you kind of have to like manage that.
True.